So Lindsay, in your OurSociety profile, you talk a lot about the transparency pledge, and that's a big motive of our society, is a more transparent and free and open government. That's why we have our free and open campaign election platform. And you should be sure, if you haven't already, to check out Lindsay Brown's profile on oursociety.org. But why don't you tell us a little bit about the transparency pledge? What is that, and what does it mean to you?
So the transparency pledge to me means that as a representative of the people, that I should be as accessible to the people I'm representing as possible. And that means clear communication. That means being above board in terms of where any funding for my campaign comes from, and really just being as much of an open book about the political process as possible, because if we want average people to be representing us and we want average people to run, we need to show average people what that looks like.
So it's safe to say that should you be elected, you would continue to communicate with your constituents on OurSociety. Like, that would be something you would be actively involved in, making sure that people are aware. And that's a really interesting concept. I think that's a big thing we're trying to push, is a more, bringing politics to the consumer in a more, accessible, easy way, right? So it is a more transparent government. That's definitely better for all of us. I mean,
Yes.
I think it's hard to argue, no matter what side of the coin you're on, against transparency in our government. So Lindsay, on your OurSociety profile, I know you talk a lot about the current spy state within the U.S. So as a future potential congresswoman, why don't you tell us about your perspective on the current spy state within the U.S. and what you believe it means for the country?
Thank you. So I believe that the current system with FISA courts and what really started with the Patriot Act of domestic surveillance is a violation of the Fourth Amendment. And even though I grew up in the generation of the internet where really nothing is private anymore, and I have chosen to put most of my life publicly on the internet, especially as now someone hoping to be a public servant, I think that most Americans don't necessarily realize how much of their personal information is getting shared with the government and with big corporations, really against their will. And this goes back to the fact that my career is in technology. Like, I'm painfully aware of how much information on us that big internet companies and big data collects that we don't even think about. It's really, it's kind of terrifying. And some people say, oh, well, if you have nothing to hide, then it doesn't matter. But it's really the principle of the fact that we should have this inherent right to our own personal privacy that's already enshrined in our Constitution.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting perspective, because there's also studies to support what you're saying about the lack of necessity of it. I think it's always been sold to us, right, as this safety precaution, right? It's always fear. But the Cato Institute, which is a limited government think tank, so let's put that in perspective. This is not a super progressive think tank. This is someone who believes in limited government. They have come up with a study. It says you have a 1 in 3.6 billion chance, 1 in 3.6 billion of dying to a terrorist attack in the U.S. Now, of course, anytime I read a study from a think tank, I like to just do some research about the information. And it turns out UC Irvine professor Ruben Rumbaugh also agreed that the claim was very accurate and the data was sound data. So there's statistical data to demonstrate that the chance of us actually being killed in a terrorist attack are so low. At the time of the filming of this interview, we've just recently experienced a domestic terrorist attack, right? And in the U.S., it seems that we have way more domestic terrorism than we do any sort of international terrorism, which is kind of a scary thought. And yet none of these, none of them are prevented, which is weird. You would think with this spy state that has been kind of developed, we might actually be able to catch some people,
right,
but it hasn't kind of worked out. So your perspective is it's not working, and because it's not working, we shouldn't just give up our privacy rights. And even, I think it sounds like you'd even be willing to go one step further, which is we need to kind of have a look at some of the corporations' control of our information, because we have a generation of people who have essentially become the product, and,
right,
and to some extent unwillingly, right, or unwittingly, I should say.
Yeah, like you hear these stories about how a father of a teenage girl found out she was pregnant because she was actually targeted by a mailer based on her internet search history.
Gosh.
which is terrifying.
Yeah.
And recently it was reported that even if you put your phone on airplane mode, all it does is delays your phone from sending all of your location data to Google and Facebook.
Wow. Didn't know that.
Yeah. So the only way to get around being tracked, your every single move when you have your phone on you is to turn your phone off completely.
Wow. Like if you turn the GPS off, does it stop tracking? No, it still records it. When you turn it back on, it just sends it. That's nuts.
Yeah, even if it's not using GPS off of satellites, it's pinging off of towers.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's pretty. I mean, and I guess to some extent that's the price we pay for the society, right? Like if we're gonna have instant communication, and geolocation, right? There's got to be some things, but of course that data could be used in ways that aren't to monetize, ourselves. So that's super interesting.
Yeah, it can be a bit nefarious. I just read an article about the last 2 years of Facebook and all of the implications of that. But one of the most alarming things that I read is that several employees who were contractors were actually fired because their location tracking showed them talking to the reporter who was breaking news of these leaks from Facebook.
Huh.
And
now that's interesting.
Some of the leakers who are still at Facebook, according to this reporter, insisted on having both phones turned off before even reaching the shared destination so that there wouldn't be any evidence that they were in the same geographical location together.
Wow, so that's a great perspective and something for all of us at home. If you're ever going to report abuse or misuse, turn off your phone. And just one final point, just if you guys are concerned about security, obviously Lindsay is, and that's going to be that's one of her mandates that she's running on. There's also just quick alternatives for you. If you're using your phone, you can download the Firefox browser, which doesn't track your movement. DuckDuckGo is a search engine that doesn't record your searches. Compared to, for example, Google Search and Google Chrome, which record everything. So there are some options. Obviously, it doesn't stop the GPS pinging, but at least all of your searches aren't going to be public. And these browsers and search engines are getting a lot of users, so they do produce some pretty solid results.